After Clint Eastwood's longtime girlfriend passed away suddenly at the age of 61, a representative from the Monterey County Health Department confirmed that she died from a heart attack. The loss came quietly but hit hard. At 94 years old, Clint Eastwood did something that shocked nearly everyone. He directed his 42nd film, an achievement that most people his age could not even imagine attempting. Critics praised the movie and called it his strongest work in more than 10 years. On the surface, it looked like another late-career triumph. But behind the scenes, Clint was carrying a deep personal grief. His partner had died without warning, and the loss changed his emotional world in ways the public could not immediately see. When his son later spoke about how Clint was doing, he said his father was doing good, but the words sounded careful and guarded. Around that time, Clint gave an interview that quickly raised eyebrows. He later dismissed it himself as completely fake and misleading. Something was clearly going on beneath the calm exterior. When the full truth eventually surfaced, it explained why this chapter of his life felt different and why this might truly be the last time the world hears from him as a filmmaker. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31, 1930, in San Francisco. From the moment he entered the world, people noticed how big he was. He weighed over 11 pounds, which was unusually large for a newborn. The nurses jokingly nicknamed him Samson before his parents even finished the paperwork. His parents, Clinton Eastwood Sr. and Ruth Eastwood, brought him home to the Lake Merritt area of Oakland. They were trying to build a stable life during the Great Depression, a time when stability was hard to come by. Clint's father initially worked as a bond salesman but later found long-term employment with Georgia Pacific, which gave the family more consistency. His mother stayed home while the children were young, then later took a job as a clerk at IBM once they were older. Clint grew up with one sibling, his younger sister Jean. During the 1930s, the family moved frequently, going from town to town as his parents searched for better opportunities. At the time, these moves felt like a matter of survival. Years later, however, the story of his upbringing would become far more complicated than people realized. For much of his adult life, Clint spoke publicly about growing up poor. He often described his childhood as difficult and shaped by hardship during the Depression. That image fit well with the tough, self-made persona he later projected on screen. But that story began to unravel years later when Sandra Locke, who lived with Clint from 1975 to 1989, revealed a different truth. She explained that by 1940, the Eastwood family had settled in Piedmont, one of the wealthiest suburbs in Northern California. Their lifestyle there was far from poor. They had a private swimming pool, belonged to a country club, and had enough money for every family member to own and drive their own car. At a time when many American families didn't even have one vehicle, this level of comfort was rare. Locke said plainly that the family was never truly poor. This revelation shocked many people and challenged the narrative Clint had long presented. Even so, the contrast between the instability of his early years and the comfort of his teenage life quietly shaped who he became. He had seen both sides, and that combination influenced how he viewed work, success, and security. Despite growing up in relative comfort during his teenage years, Clint struggled in school. He had little interest in academics and cared far more about cars, girls, music, and having fun. His lack of focus led to consequences. He was held back a full grade in middle school. When he entered Piedmont High School in early 1945, his restlessness only intensified. Within a year, he was expelled after a series of reckless stunts. These included writing obscene messages on a scoreboard, burning an effigy, and riding his bicycle across a flooded sports field until he ruined the grass. By that point, he was already extremely tall, standing 6 feet 4 inches, with a lean frame, leather jackets, and a slicked-back hairstyle that made him stand out. After his expulsion, he transferred to Oakland Technical High School, where he finally graduated on February 2, 1949. During all those years, the only subjects that truly held his interest were music and mechanical work. That same year, his parents and sister decided to move to Seattle. Clint, then 18 years old, chose to stay behind in California. It was a turning point. He picked independence over family comfort, even though he had no clear plan. While his family built a new life in the Pacific Northwest, Clint took whatever jobs he could find. He worked as a firefighter, a golf caddy, and a lifeguard. He drifted around Oakland and nearby areas, uncertain about his future but determined to stand on his own. That decision to stay in California, though risky at the time, placed him exactly where he needed to be for the opportunities that would soon follow. In 1951, Clint was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War. He was assigned to Fort Ord in California, where he worked as a swimming instructor. He never saw combat overseas, but fate still had a life-altering experience waiting for him. That same year, after visiting his girlfriend in Seattle, Clint boarded a Navy aircraft to return to California. He wore his military uniform to qualify for a free military flight, something many servicemen did. The plane, a Douglas AD-1Q Skyraider, took off from Sandpoint Naval Air Station. What began as a routine trip quickly turned into a fight for survival. While flying along the coast, the plane suffered a series of failures. The radio stopped working, cutting off all communication. Then the oxygen system failed, making it difficult to breathe as the altitude affected them. The navigation instruments went dark, leaving the pilot blind as thick fog rolled in. Even the intercom between the cockpit and Clint's seat stopped working. The companion aircraft vanished into the fog, and fuel drained faster than expected. Eventually, with no fuel left, the pilot had no choice but to ditch the plane into the Pacific Ocean near Point Reyes. The plane hit the water hard but remained upright long enough for Clint and the pilot, Lieutenant Francis Anderson, to escape. They inflated life rafts and paddled away as the aircraft sank beneath the waves. Strong ocean currents soon pulled them apart, leaving Clint alone in the freezing water. In the distance, he spotted a faint lighthouse beam and began swimming toward it. He swam for nearly an hour through icy water, his muscles burning and his body shaking from cold and exhaustion. Eventually, he reached shore and wandered until he found an RCA radio station. The operator later recalled that Clint looked disoriented and barely able to speak. That experience stayed with him for life. Decades later, when pilot Chesley Sullenberger hesitated to approve a film about his emergency landing on the Hudson River, everything changed when he learned that Clint Eastwood had survived a similar crash. That shared experience created trust and helped Clint bring authenticity to the film Sully. The plane crash also changed Clint's life in another major way. Before the incident, he was scheduled for deployment to Korea. The investigation and medical evaluations that followed the crash caused delays, and by the time everything was cleared, his deployment was canceled. Many soldiers sent overseas during that period never returned. Instead, Clint remained stateside at Fort Ord, continuing to work as a lifeguard, the very skill that had helped save his life. The experience deepened his awareness of mortality and risk, themes that would later appear again and again in his films. After leaving the Army, Clint tried to break into Hollywood with almost no money and no clear direction. He took odd jobs, digging swimming pools and driving garbage trucks. He briefly attended Los Angeles City College but dropped out to focus on acting. His early film roles were tiny and often uncredited, including a brief appearance in Revenge of the Creature in 1955. That same year, Universal Studios dropped him from their contract. Executives said he looked awkward, spoke too slowly, and didn't have the right screen presence. For the next 3 years, he struggled, unsure if he would ever find steady work as an actor. Everything changed in 1958 when he was cast as Rowdy Yates on the television western Rawhide. The show premiered in January 1959 and gave Clint his first stable job in the industry. At first, he earned around $700 per episode, which wasn't much but was enough to ease his financial stress. The show was a hit, and millions of viewers watched it every week. Over time, his salary increased significantly, eventually reaching around $100,000 per year. Still, Clint felt creatively limited by the role and believed he was capable of more. By 1965, Rawhide began to fall apart. Cast members were fired to cut costs, and the show was moved to a new time slot where it struggled against competition. After just 13 episodes with Clint as the lead, the series was canceled. Around that same time, Italian director Sergio Leone approached Clint about starring in a low-budget western being filmed in Spain. Clint was not enthusiastic. The pay was low, the director didn't speak English, and the project seemed unimportant. He almost turned it down. Other actors had already rejected the role. But Clint eventually accepted out of curiosity. That decision changed everything. The film, A Fistful of Dollars, became an international sensation. Its success turned Clint into a global star and launched one of the most influential careers in film history. From there, his rise was rapid. Each new film brought greater success and higher pay. By the late 1960s, Clint was earning hundreds of thousands, then millions, per movie. His quiet, intense screen presence became iconic. Films like Dirty Harry cemented his status, even as they sparked controversy. Dirty Harry arrived at a tense moment in American history and divided audiences. Some praised it, while others condemned it as glorifying violence. Protests erupted, critics argued fiercely, and Clint found himself at the center of cultural debates about law, justice, and authority. Yet the film's impact was undeniable. Over the decades, Clint Eastwood continued to evolve, not just as an actor but as a director with a distinct, disciplined style. He became known for working efficiently, respecting budgets, and trusting his instincts. Even into his 90s, he continued to create, driven by a deep understanding of life, loss, and survival. The recent death of his longtime partner marked another profound turning point. It brought his long journey into sharper focus and reminded the world that even legends are shaped by love, loss, and time. The district attorney says that his office speaks for the victim, if Harry would allow them to do so. But in the end, the legal system completely rejects Harry. The killer is released, and Harry throws his badge away in frustration. The movie does not end with victory or relief. Instead, it closes with a deep sense of anger and disappointment toward both uncontrolled violence and a legal system that seems unable to protect the innocent. Harry's question about who truly speaks for victims struck a powerful nerve because, in 1971, the answer was deeply unsettling. At that time, victims' rights groups barely existed at all. The National Organization for Victim Assistance would not be founded until 1975, 4 years after the film's release. That same year, the first rape crisis center in the United States opened. The Miranda v. Arizona decision was still new and controversial, having been decided by a narrow vote in 1966. Congress had already tried and failed to weaken it with a law passed in 1968. When the killer Scorpio demanded $200,000 while a teenage girl was suffocating underground, Harry's angry question exposed a real weakness in the system. The law focused heavily on protecting the accused, while organized support for victims was still years away from becoming a priority. Instead of fading away, the controversy made the movie even bigger. Dirty Harry earned over $28 million at the domestic box office and went on to inspire 4 sequels. Many people who felt exhausted and powerless because of the Vietnam War, rising crime, and social unrest saw their frustration reflected on screen. One line from the movie became famous everywhere, often quoted incorrectly, about feeling lucky. Even decades later, people continued to debate what the film truly meant. In 2012, exactly 41 years after it first appeared in theaters, the Library of Congress added Dirty Harry to the National Film Registry. The explanation was clear and meaningful. Films are not chosen because they are flawless. They are chosen because they capture who Americans were at a specific moment in history. A movie once condemned as dangerous propaganda was now preserved as an important cultural record. While all the noise and arguments surrounded Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood was quietly building something else. In 1971, the same year that movie made him a major star, he directed his first film, Play Misty for Me. He filmed it in Carmel, California, where he lived, and proved that he could control a story from behind the camera as well as in front of it. The success of that project gave him creative power. Throughout the 1970s, he acted and directed at the same time, working on films like High Plains Drifter, The Eiger Sanction, and The Outlaw Josie Wales. By directing himself, he began moving away from the image of being just a tough gunman. He started exploring deeper themes such as guilt, consequences, regret, and moral responsibility. The simple cowboy image began to crack and reveal something more complex underneath. That long transformation paid off years later. On March 29, 1993, at the 65th Academy Awards, Unforgiven changed everything. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. Clint Eastwood became one of the few actors in history to direct himself to an Academy Award win. He was 62 years old at the time. The movie earned over $159 million worldwide on a modest budget and completely dismantled the myths of the Western genre that Clint himself had helped create decades earlier. He dedicated the film to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, the 2 directors who had shaped his early career. Even though he lost Best Actor to Al Pacino that night, the message was clear. Clint Eastwood had redefined his legacy and proven that he was more than the roles that made him famous. He did it again with even greater impact more than a decade later. On February 27, 2005, Million Dollar Baby dominated the Academy Awards, winning Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, and Best Supporting Actor. The film was made for about $30 million and earned over $216 million worldwide. Eastwood was involved in nearly every part of the project. He directed, produced, acted, and even composed the music. When he accepted the award for Best Director, he was 74 years old, making him the oldest person to win that honor at the time. The win came 12 years after Unforgiven and proved that his earlier success was not a one-time achievement. At an age when most filmmakers slow down, he was creating some of the most emotionally powerful work of his career. A big reason Clint Eastwood was able to keep working so effectively was his unique style on set. He became famous for using very few takes, often just 1 or 2. Actors quickly learned that they needed to be prepared at all times. There was little rehearsal and no endless repetition. Eastwood believed that real emotions often happen naturally and disappear if forced too many times. His sets were calm and quiet. Budgets stayed low, schedules stayed tight, and performances felt natural instead of overly controlled. His approach showed that simplicity and restraint could strengthen creativity rather than weaken it. Away from the camera, his personal life was far more complicated. Between 1954 and 1996, Clint Eastwood had at least 8 children with 6 different women, spanning more than 4 decades between the oldest and youngest. Several of these children were born while he was married to Maggie Johnson, his wife from 1953 to 1984. One daughter, Kimber, born in 1964, remained a secret for 25 years before becoming public in 1989. Even though Clint's name was on the birth certificate, the truth stayed hidden as his fame grew. During his long marriage, he lived openly as if he were single. As early as 1963, he admitted that he planned to live life on his own terms and described romantic affairs as addictive. Women came and went through his life on movie sets and in acting classes, while Maggie Johnson endured quietly. Some people described their marriage as open, while others saw clear emotional pain. One long affair with stunt woman Roxanne Tunis began in 1959 and lasted about 14 years, resulting in the birth of Kimber. The relationship continued openly while his marriage remained intact. Later came his intense relationship with Sandra Locke, which lasted 13 years and ended in a massive legal battle in 1989. Locke accused him of betrayal, emotional control, and manipulation. She later discovered that during the final years of their relationship, he had secretly fathered 2 children with another woman. The lawsuit ended with a settlement involving a directing deal that later collapsed when it was revealed to be fake. A jury quickly sided with Locke before another settlement finally closed the case. At 78 years old, Clint Eastwood entered 2009 and quietly proved Hollywood wrong once again. His film Gran Torino began with a limited release in just 84 theaters, almost as if it were an experiment. The opening weekend earned less than $300,000, which looked unimpressive. Then something unexpected happened. Word of mouth spread quickly. the movie expanded into more theaters and suddenly earned $29 million in its wide opening weekend. That number broke his previous personal record. What made it even more impressive was the low cost of the film. Gran Torino was made for about $33 million and eventually earned nearly $270 million worldwide. Each theater averaged strong attendance, giving Eastwood the biggest nationwide launch of his career as both an actor and director. A quiet story about an aging Korean War veteran and his immigrant neighbors connected deeply with audiences and proved that relevance has nothing to do with age. That momentum continued into an even bigger moment a few years later. When American Sniper was released in January 2015, it arrived with explosive force. In just 4 days, the film earned over $105 million, the largest opening weekend ever for a drama at that time. By the end of its run, it had earned nearly $548 million worldwide on a budget of around $60 million. It became the most successful war film of all time, surpassing Saving Private Ryan, and was one of the few R-rated movies ever to cross the $500 million mark. Bradley Cooper's performance earned multiple Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. At the same time, the film sparked major controversy. Praise and anger collided, making it impossible to ignore. Just a few years earlier, Eastwood had already dominated headlines without releasing a film at all. In August 2012, at 82 years old, he appeared at the Republican National Convention and delivered an unscripted speech that shocked the nation. Speaking to an empty chair meant to represent President Barack Obama, he confused, angered, and fascinated millions of viewers. Nearly 30 million people watched it live. Critics called it embarrassing, while others defended it as bold. Eastwood later explained that the chair idea was spontaneous and meant to break from scripted speeches. The moment became legendary, especially after President Obama responded with a simple tweet showing himself seated confidently, saying, "This seat's taken." The response went viral and turned the moment into political history. Away from politics and cameras, Eastwood's personal life continued quietly. In 1986, he bought the Mission Ranch Hotel in Carmel, saving it from being turned into condominiums. That same year, he served as mayor of Carmel for a small salary. Nearly 30 years later, in 2014, he met Christina Sandero while she was working there as a hostess. They quickly formed a bond, and she moved into his home within months. Their relationship remained private and grounded. His children met her early and liked her, describing her as kind and normal. They made only a few public appearances together, including award shows and premieres. Their final red carpet appearance came in 2019, after which they disappeared from public view. The silence ended painfully in July 2024, when Christina Sandero died suddenly just days after her 61st birthday. Clint Eastwood, then 94, released a brief statement calling her a loving and caring woman and saying he would miss her deeply. The loss was sudden and devastating. A decade-long relationship ended without warning. Despite the grief, Eastwood continued working. At 94, he directed Juror 2, his 42nd film. The movie impressed critics and was widely praised as some of his best work in years. If this film turns out to be his final chapter, many believe it is a fitting ending. After more than 70 years in the industry, Clint Eastwood closed his story quietly, thoughtfully, and entirely on his own terms.